This is AJ Wachtel. Welcome to my podcast, Wachtelligence, where I discuss with my guests the past, present, and future of the local and national music scene with a focus on Boston and New England. Today's episode, The Rise and Fall of the Beat magazine, is about where it all started for me as an entertainment journalist. The weekly fanzine started in 1984 during the last great local music era and lasted until the early 90s. The publication covered bands from all the genres kicking on the scene and had the week's club listings. Today's guest is Gary Shea, a musician turned entertainment entrepreneur who started out working for the magazine's owners, Mickey O and Dave G, at Bun Ratty's, a nightclub they also managed, and then took over running the publication during its final days. Hey, Gary, thanks for speaking with us and coming on my show.
You know, I found it ironic that when you sent me the note about it, you said, let's, try to remember some of the, nights we hung out as part of the Beat in Boston. Right. And, it just occurred to me, no one who goes out with you for a night can actually remember what happened when next day.
Well, listen, I'm a lot better now.
You have to sort of take notes or just concentrate on what happened prior to, while you were still sober.
Well, your days at Bun Ratty's right across the street from the Beat magazine, you worked for Mickey O and Dave G, but that's an important part of the Beat magazine's history, because without Bun Ratty's, there would have been no Beat magazine. And when I was going from nightclub to nightclub, 2 or 3 clubs a night to write my gossip column, get the factoids for Insignifica, and also to get all the CDs that people wanted to give to me. They knew at the end of the night, every single night, 24/7, 365, I'd be at Bun Ratty's for last call, and people could just come in and give me their tapes, or they could give me their factoids for my gossip column, and you and me would just be drinking there from time to time,
It was amazing how we'd always end up back there at the end of the night. But it was a great period. I mean, at the time in Boston, it was funny because a year or two ago, I ran into Sal Baglio down here playing with Tom Hambridge,
right,
on the Jersey Shore. And, we were remembering how back then the Stompers used to go out and play Wednesday to Saturday or Thursday to Saturday every week, all year long, and make really good money. There was a lot of clubs. There was a lot of places to play. In a lot of ways, that was that kind of environment that was both good and bad for Boston, because it was almost like the place was just big enough to feel important, but not big enough to really matter.
But that's the way that your connections to New York City had the Beat magazine bringing bands down to New York City to be seen. And that was done by no other publication in the era at all.
Exactly. They played at the Limelight, and they played at the ultra hip at the time, China Club up on the Upper West Side. So, but yeah, that was part of the idea when we were doing it. Let's get these bands down to New York. So that the people that need to see them can see them, or at least have the opportunity.
And who we had, you brought down, the Beat magazine brought down to the Limelight, which was an old church. They brought down Blockyard, Tom Keegan and the Language, and Gotham City. And, at the China Club on Broadway and 75th, if I recall, we brought down the Drive, Pleasure Point, Night Work, and I did all the promo for that, the Beat magazine. Yeah. I did the Beat, Boston Takes a Bite Out of the Big Apple. And, I still have a flyer from that. I showed Harrison, and I got a big grin about that, because the bus ride down with a keg of beer and the bus ride back, those were legendary.
I was going to say, yeah, you even took the bus ride. That was...
But the difference between the New York and the Boston scene was that the doors opened up at 10 o'clock and the show started at midnight.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was bartending at the Ritz, it was not uncommon, particularly on the weekend, to get out of there at 5 o'clock in the morning and immediately go to an after hours joint around the corner on 3rd Avenue, till about 10 o'clock. I mean, you'd come walking out in daylight. You'd be like, let's get breakfast and go to bed.
Well, listen, let's get back to the Beat magazine. How we met, how you and I met. Let me briefly say what brought me to the Beat magazine, and then we can talk about you and me. I was going to grad school for my MBA. My dad died, and I moved to Alston, and I took my grief out by going to Bunratty's and to going to Father's too and drinking. And I started going to Bunratty's, and Mickey O'Halloran and Dave G. I met both of those guys at Bunratty's. Mickey O was a tough kid from Charlestown, and Dave G. went to Graham Junior College with John Butcher, and then they later lived together. And
hey, by the way, Age, I was a bartender at Father's too for a while.
Yeah,
I was a day bartender there.
Well, everybody had, you and me. That's why you and me, are such good friends, because we had so much in common, even though we didn't know each other from day one at the Beat magazine. But first Mickey O gets me in as copy editor at the magazine. Then I started to write live reviews. Then I became the associate editor, and I knew that I became the associate editor because the initials were ASS period. So I knew that behind my back they were calling me the goddamn ass editor because I was loud, obnoxious, and always right. But then after that, some of the issues, I wrote the cover story, the secondary story. I took over Insignificant from Mickey O'Halloran. And what I was bringing up before is that Mickey O'Halloran left the Beat magazine, and you came back from New York City to run the magazine when he was gone.
Yeah, there was a little gap in between the two, but yeah. And I kind of liked it when David was sending me the magazine at first, when you guys first started up. I kind of liked what was going on, because it did seem like things were mixed up a little bit. It wasn't, our friends kind of thing. I sort of saw it shift that way.
Well, I think two of the things that you brought there is, one, you tried to expand to Providence, you tried to expand to Worcester, which was necessary.
Western Mass, Hartford, that area.
Right, but they never lasted. Why?
Well, I mean, probably the main reason was I wasn't there to service them, after I left. So it really, the original idea, if you remember, was to sort of turn the Beat into the TV guide of rock. I mean, there was a grand scheme, the TV guide of rock and roll, which eventually, maybe in some way, shape, or form, could attract some sort of investment capital to make it sort of a national version. Right. Every city in the country would have the Beat. Every city in the country would have their own sections in the middle of it, and the information on the outside or whatever, the advertisement, everything would be more nationally based. We did sort of a miniature version of that. We had the outer section, which was supposed to cover all of New England. We renamed it New England's Rock and Entertainment Guide from Boston's Rock and Entertainment Guide. And if you recall, there were three different sections that had different listings, different gossip columns, even different insignificant columns. And that was the grand scheme at the time. But, that was also, when you use the word grand, you need a lot of help. So,
right. And the wrong people might have been left in charge at the end. But we'll talk about that. But another thing,
you can't have internal resistance. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like being halfway to the moon and having one of the astronauts go, I don't know if we should land.
How about Pluto?
There you go. Let's try something else.
Well, another thing that you brought was, after Mickey O left, there was a very limited scope of the bands. You tried to get non-Bunratty's bands, punk bands on the cover. Do you know how hard it was for me to get the Gangrene or the African Roots bands on the cover?
Oh, we got Dinosaur Jr. That's the one I always remember, because that was the first big one. And we even got the record label to come in with Newberry Comics and buy the ads. And, that was, for me, that was what I was trying to show people. This is what we want to do, Now,
after Mickey O left and you came in, you tried to change the direction, and that was reflected in the covers. Like you said, Dinosaur Jr., you also had Michael Bolton, Vinnie Vincent, Pat Metheny, who weren't local artists. And you just said, what was your thinking mainly? The grand scheme was just try to make it more national.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole idea. I mean, the difference is you know, you had there was a limited market of people that were interested. They were actually interested in the regional music scene, but there was always a big market. There was always a big market for people interested in the national music scene, and those were the people you were trying to sell to. You know, trying to pick up the magazine. So that was, I mean, that was kind of the whole idea. Put something, if you remember. Actually, just before I had even started, they were trying to sell them for a certain amount of days in the Store 24s. Was that it? Store 24, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that didn't work.
Yeah, well, I know. And a lot of the reason, again, it didn't work is because it really wasn't, you know, there were in a bunch of stores around the area, but you only had a limited amount of people that really cared what was going on for entertainment in Boston.
Yeah.
And to the degree that we offered to give them, you know what I mean?
Right. Funny thing about you and me, we were talking about this morning, is after you came back and you wanted to change direction and everything, we needed money and we needed support. So you wanted to get a sponsorship. So you and Dave G asked me to hook up with Oedipus, who was, I think, the program director.
Yeah.
Over at WBCN, which was the Rock of Boston at the time.
Yeah,
you and me and him went out to lunch right next to the Paradise. I think it was Chinese food. And you said that you were real surprised at how cheap it was compared to New York City.
Well, I just thought it was funny. I get the bill and I'm looking at it, and then Ed looks at me and goes, do you want me to pay for it? And I go, no, I was just looking at the price. It's pretty cheap.
I remember that. So, you know, talk about the sponsorships. It went from BCN, then we were sponsored, the Beat Magazine was sponsored by WAAF, and then finally, I think, by V66. Why didn't they stay? I mean, that was an administrative thing. That didn't concern me.
Well, the whole idea, again, was, you know, is the whole expansion thing. We had other sponsors. If you remember, we had the station in Providence sponsoring that version of it.
Right.
We had WAQY in Springfield that sponsored that version of it. You know, and again, a lot of that stuff, once I left, just couldn't be serviced directly. But, you know, there was always the idea that when you expand a business, you may see, you know, sort of a boom, a little bit of a growth to start with while you're expanding. And then it may eventually, for a lot of different reasons, collapse back down. Right. But I always felt, though, pretty good about the fact that even after I was gone, when it did sort of collapse back down, it was still much bigger than what it was when I started. And it was doing a lot more than what it was when I walked in the door. You know, it was just very Boston-centric at the time, but Boston wasn't really a big enough market to sustain a business. Let's just put it out with that kind of business, unless you were attached to something bigger, you know?
Hey, you know, a great short Beat Magazine, Tony Berardini story, since you and I were just talking about Oedipus from WBCN.
Tony was the GM over there, wasn't he? I think he was at the time, yeah.
Well, I had just been asked by Mickey and Dave to write a cover story on Velocity with Johnny Press, a great lead guitarist, still around, still playing guitar. And they were from Worcester.
I just like to throw in that our friend Wayne Morgan also had a band briefly called Velocity a couple of years earlier.
No doubt.
Wayne was the original Boy Next Door guitarist. So
in your band. In your band. But So they asked me, Rick Gallagher, who was in the administration out in Worcester, and he worked for WAAF, and he goes, AJ, do me a favor. You wrote a great cover story on the band. We're having a record release party next week. Please announce us. We do anything. Please, please. So I said, sure. It's at Bun Rise, my club. I'll be there anyway. So I get there, and it's about an hour before the show, and Rick comes running up to me, and he's a long face and everything. He goes, AJ, apologies. He goes, Tony Berardini is going to come and announce the band tonight. I didn't know this, blah, blah, blah. And I got it. You know, they're from Worcester. They want to get airplay and the rock and roll. I had no problems with that. Me and Berardini were tight. Me and Oedipus was tight, still tight. So I go, fine, no problem. So he goes, I have an idea. You announce Tony. So I say, sure. So I get there, and I'm on stage, and I'm half in the bag by this time. I'm stoned. I get up there. The place is packed. And I go, Tony Berardini, this guy is the #1 man who brings to you all the music from blah, 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 blah. The place is starting to shake and get excited. Then I go, and now Tony Berardini. The place, the walls shake. It's thunderous applause. And I see Berardini come walking on the stage with a sour look on his face. I stick out my hand to shake it. His hand, he shakes my hand and goes, you fucking asshole. How am I going to top that? And I laughed. I just recently spoke to Berardini about that, and he still laughs about that.
Yeah, he was a real professional. That whole place, that was a great radio station in its day.
No, so now what we should talk about, since everybody wants to know, is you fired me because the direction was going. You wanted to bring the magazine in a different direction, and we've talked about this.
That had nothing to do with it.
No. But we should talk about that because you were changing direction of the magazine. And, you know, I pretty much was the face of the magazine for a decade. I was out to 2-3 nights a week, to 2 or 3 bars a night, 7 nights a week, handshaking people. I'm AJ from the Beat magazine. You don't see anybody from the Herald and the Globe coming out to hear your music, do you? And, you know, people, I still have friends from 30 years ago. I'm still getting that. But you and I, after you fired me, we walked across the street and got loaded at Bun Ratty's. And I think we went out that night bar hopping.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, but again, just to clarify, because, you know, really, the argument that was brought forth was, you know, basically the face of the magazine locally, and certain people amongst the ownership weren't really happy with you being the face. But the problem, well, ironically, as far as review of musical content, if you recall at the time, we only had one reviewer, you know, who just basically was more interested in trashing things sometimes than just listening to it and reviewing it. You know what I mean? I don't like it, I'm going to trash it kind of thing.
That was Ace Diamond, who was Michael Hill.
Oh, I was gonna kind of keep that.
Well, you told me that part of the deal was you didn't want Ace Diamond to be the face of the magazine either.
Well, not so much. I didn't want him to be the face of it. I mean, to be honest with you, I was fine with everything the way it kind of was at the time. But that was when the argument about you being the face in public came up, I would counter with that argument. You know, and I said, well, you know, and also it certainly was not healthy for you to be out at night and obviously frustrated with what was going on and voicing that frustration.
Yes.
Just as it wasn't healthy for people to come into the office and hear somebody else talk about how they didn't like the fact that you were out there voicing your frustration.
Well, you know, part of the problem was, we were talking about this before, all of a sudden, little by little, it got to be Michael Hill, who was the editor of the magazine, who was a roadie for John Butcher beforehand.
And then Michael.
And then David G. Against Mickey O'Halloran. There was an inner turmoil there, and I got laid on the tracks all the time about that. Mickey O made sure that I took over writing most of the magazine. He made sure that I took over Insignifica because he personally trained me. You know,
you did all our big covers, and you got all those big interviews. You were the only one that could do it.
And look, I'm still doing it 35 years later, and I'm the only one doing it. I must have been a good writer.
Hey, you got me for an interview, and, you know, my people have me lined up for the next year. I don't remember much after the afternoon. I just remember going across the street, and you know, you were obviously disappointed. I said, come on, I'll buy you a beer. But, I mean, essentially it was, you know, the way I kind of looked at it, it was kind of a trade. And it wasn't like like I said, it wasn't had anything to do with the direction of the magazine. There, you know, I wasn't interested in direction as I was expansion.
Right.
You know, it was more of a trade-off, basically. You know, to just kind of, you know, instead of having, you know, one face in the public and one face reviewing all the music, let's have multiple people doing it, and you know.
And the thing I was saying, and I think I was partially put into Mickey O'Halloran's side of the camp because me and Mickey were so tight. I used to go out with him, you know, for hours every night, and we would drive all over Worcester, New Hampshire. We go everywhere every night, and I learned everything from Mickey O. And I think that there was a lot of animosity with David and Michael was very jealous of me and you. You know, you and I had money. We came from families that had money. You and I were formally educated. This is a guy, I don't even know he graduated high school. He was a roadie and was in the best job of his life. And he sees me hanging out at night getting all the credit.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of it. Because Michael still had a lot of desire to be a star. And I even remember, maybe you can verify this story because I think David told me this, but I seem to remember they offered him a job at WAAF in sales. At one point, but he had to cut his hair and he wouldn't do it.
I don't remember that, but I do remember.
I don't listen. Michael isn't around to
right. We're not bad mouthing him, but
yeah.
You know,
there was still an element, but there was still an element of him that wanted to be the center of attention.
Well, you know, I remember I was in the back seat smoking my chillum once. So we were driving back. Mickey O'Halloran was driving. Michael was in the passenger seat, and I'm just smoking, just being quiet. And they're talking, and Mickey's saying what he wanted the beat to go, the direction, everything. And Michael said, "quote," he goes, "I'll follow your star anywhere, Mickey."
Yeah.
And I just sit there and said, I'm not following anybody's star. You know, I mean, these guys are big fish in small ponds, but I certainly wasn't going to be stuck in Boston my whole life. And look, I did get stuck in Boston my whole life, you know?
Yeah, but to your credit, you kept it going. You're still doing it, you know? And it was never, listen, look at, I look back at that. Remember there was a guy, it was funny, I was thinking of this morning. There was a guy who was a big shot writer or reviewer or something like that for the Phoenix. I can't remember his name, but he used to, you know, he used to drive a cab. He never went anywhere. You never heard his name anywhere else. The only one I can think of years later that I heard his name out of Boston was Jimmy Sullivan, who was working at the Globe.
He's still around.
Yeah, I know it. I think he's in LA or something like that.
No. Jim Sullivan, he's working for Boston University's art. He's still reviewing bands and still supporting. Steve Morse is
Steve Morse was the other one, yeah.
He's doing an online course at Berkeley on rock history.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, you know, so I mean, we're still, you know,
Steve was good, but he was kind of on a different level at the time. He was actually established. Jimmy was kind of doing it part-time, writing reviews.
Well, they were both at the Globe, and you
Yeah.
had Sally Cragen, you had Clea Simon, you had Brett Milano at the Herald. Ted
Do you remember the guy
Brzezowski.
I'm talking about at the Phoenix, though? He was the cab driver. I remember.
Milo Miles.
No, it wasn't Milo Miles. I kind of remember that name now. That
Speaking about the Phoenix, when you fired me, I was already the Phoenix. I started doing reviews for them.
I remember that. Yeah.
Weeks after that, and that's because they told me that as long as I worked for the Beat magazine, I couldn't write for them, and I knew that that's because you were trying to focus the competition on them rather than the Noise magazine, which was a small fanzine that I later wrote for before they went out of business.
Well, I wanted their advertisement. That's what I wanted,
Right.
Yeah, I wanted. That's and I wanted to get the stuff they were getting, and they were the big dog, really, kind of. But a lot of those guys that did that stuff for the Phoenix at the time, I mean, they never really, that was it.
They were paid chump change. I mean,
Yeah,
there's still more money than I got from the Beat.
And I kind of remember telling you at the time when we were separating, or whatever you want to call it, that this would open you up to do a lot more. You could do stuff for the Beat, you could do stuff for the Phoenix, maybe for the Globe.
It was life. It didn't. You and me are still friends, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So let's talk about the format of the Beat and some of the writers. The format, we had Insignifica, which started off first and last. I took that over from Mickey O'Halloran. Then we had a cover story, a secondary story, letters to the editor. And I have 2 letters to the editor of people lambasting me as a drunkard who knows nothing. And I still love them. You're not doing your job if you don't get the press, right?
I know, yeah, I know.
And we did sound reactions, live reviews.
And again, keep in mind that after, when we expanded, we also had those, inserts for each region we were in.
Hey, I got not only did I get those bad letters, I got a postcard from somebody in Iowa praising me for a story I wrote. I said, "Where's Iowa? Take a left in Chicago?"
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, because the guy ended up being my boss. Stu Fine, who was working at Polygram at the time, signed the original deal with John Butcher.
Right.
And Stu ended up being my boss at EMI. When I first started doing business with him is when I owned a recording studio in New York City, or as a partner in it, that was very prominent at the time. As a matter of fact, it's called Power Play Studio, and it's considered to be the birthplace of hip hop in New York City, at least hip hop on record. And
I heard that the birthplace of hip hop was at the Bud Ratty's men's room with you in there at 2:30 a.m.
Well, that was kind of anti-hip hop. I never really got the rhyming thing down. But the reason I bring it up, because it was prominent, it's actually somebody's making you go to powerplaystudiomovie.com, you can see the trailer for the upcoming documentary on it. But I was doing business with Stu's label, Wild Pitch, at the time. It was an independent. And it was funny because we put Gangstar, one of his first acts, on the cover of the Beat.
And I wrote the story.
Yeah. And it's funny because when we were doing business for a while at the studio, and he calls me up one day, he says, and this was probably, I don't know, early 90s or something like that. And he goes, "You were up in Boston for a while, right?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you remember a magazine up there called The Beat?" And I just started laughing. He goes, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, I was an owner for a while. Yeah, I kind of remember it. And he told me, that was one thing positive that The Beat magazine did. I don't think any other magazine, maybe The Noise did it, but there was a massive mailing list. And most of the people that was mailed to, were people in positions in New York and LA and places like that.
My mother in New Jersey also was on the mailing list.
There you go. So people that wanted to see, people that were using it to try to keep in touch with what was going on up in the area.
Well, and other things that were in the magazine, came out every week. We were once a week for all you people that don't know, and we had the weekly listings, the club listings of where you could go to support the music scene every day of the week. We had the history of Boston rock and roll. We had a ton of band ads.
Who used to write that? I was trying to remember.
Chuck White?
Was that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always liked that one. That was a good one.
We had laugh tracks, producer's chair, Dear Dino with Don Brown, Dave G's friend, lawyer friend, asking legal questions in the entertainment field. Roxy Report with Roxy Mizell from V66, Folkline, studio tracks, personality profiles, and even the great Zaz, Ron Pitz's cartoon.
I see. You know what? Ron is on Facebook, and I still see his art. You know, he was really good back then. He got a great one of you. I remember that. It was like
a couple of them of me.
Yeah, perfect caricature.
Well, he would do like local famous people too, and he would always do the people in Blockyard, people in all the bands, Andrew Arsenault from the Channel, all that worked, that ran the place. These are all people you recognize in his cartoons too. We did a lot of things at the Beat magazine. We didn't just cover music. We tried to cover law. We tried to cover all the genres of music.
That was definitely, the thing was, it was definitely getting kind of stale before I got up there. I had noticed that.
Jay Leno. I remember going to see Jay Leno, taking pictures of him with Beat magazine, and this is way before he was, God Emperor of the Tonight Show. But he was a great guy, and everybody supported the Beat magazine. Let's talk a little bit about the writers. We had Mickey O. We had Michael Hill. We had Carter Allen from WBCN.
I remember that.
He also wrote the YouTube book, and Dinky Dawson, the sound guy, the famous sound guy for Fleetwood Mac and Jay Giles. He wrote books on them. We had Jeff Linehan doing comedy, Chuck White, Dino Brown, Joe Viglione doing under the name of Janice Reed. He did Deep in the Rock. We even had Kathy Loeb from The Rat, and Kathy's famous for she was running the Rathskeller in the 80s. And before that, how she got famous was when the Beatles came to town in 65. She pretended that she was a journalist for some high school magazine. She was 14 years old, snuck her way into the Beatles conference, the press conference, and got invited up to meet the Beatles afterwards. So, that's why we had Kathy Logue, and we also had Marion Farrow, Debbie DeMarco, and the art department, Tom Saunier, who was also in the band Muggs.
Tom is still my computer guy, basically. 35
years later. How great is that, huh?
Yeah.
Jesse Mayer was in Finger Paint, Shake the Faith. Now he's in the rockabilly band Diablo Gato. Rick Scatino in Digny Fignes, The Young Guns. Shirley White. Shirley is, I think, married with children today. She's not in the music scene. There was even, I looked at the magazines. I dug into my archives in my closet, and we even had people named one name, Monica and Agnes. Did you know Monica or Agnes?
I don't remember. The writers were very foreign to me. I only knew one writer on that magazine.
Me.
Yeah, that was it.
All right, here. Let me just remember some of the cover stories that I wrote and some of the secondary. I had about 70 magazines in my closet. I don't have any more. I don't think anybody has a complete set. Michael Hill is gone. Maybe Dave G might have a complete set. Mickey O's gone. He doesn't have a complete set. You don't have a complete
set. I don't think Dave has them either. But you know what? You bring up the covers. It was that big glossy Jay Giles cover.
Right.
That actually got me talking to Dave, because I saw the magazine on a glossy cover, and that's where I first got the idea for
Actually, it wasn't Giles, it was Peter Wolf.
Was it Peter Wolf? Okay.
Yeah. Peter Wolf, that was when his first album came out. Him and I were bar hopping together at the time and hanging out.
Peter Wolf had something to do with Jay Giles, right?
Yes, yes.
So
before he hung out with me.
I'm not totally senile on this. But it was seeing that glossy cover the first time when he sent it to me that's why I called him up a couple of weeks later and I said, we could do something with this. Because, we could, this could be something,
He really liked that story. He was really appreciative of, the hard work I put into that story. And like I said, that was our third anniversary issue. Yeah. That was in 1987. Yeah. And I that's one of my favorites. I'm still good friends with Wolf. But I also did Ben Orr with the Cars. I did Extreme, Gangrene.
Well, if you remember, I think it was in May of 87. I came down for 3 weeks, and I went down the Cape and sold all the Cape advertisements. I had nothing to do. I was in New York. I had nothing to do at the time, so I went down and sold advertisement for a couple of weeks down there, and that's kind of like I kind of got involved with it. And then I came back, I think, end of June or something, and that's when we went at it for earnest, So, but we had it, yeah. There were a lot of, I remember you doing the cover for Extreme, right? You did that interview.
Right, and for Gangrene. And the great thing about Gangrene, they had just won the Rumble, the WBCN Rumble, which was the real big musical event at that time. And
the day after the Rumble, usually half the bands in the city broke up.
Well, Gangrene beat Johnny A's Hearts on Fire. And Johnny A went on to play with Bobby Whitlock from Derek and the Dominoes.
Johnny A was with Johnny Barnes originally, wasn't he?
No. He was with the Streets.
Oh, the Streets, that was it. Yeah.
And then he went. And
the Streets went on tour with Aerosmith.
Right. And then he played with the Yardbirds. He followed Clapton and
he was a great guitar player.
I'm still friends. He still plays. But I remember when I did that story with Johnny. He was just in a small band, Hearts on Fire, and it was really big because when I did the story on Gangrene that beat his band, we were at Father's 2. We were drinking on a Sunday, and I was with Gangrene, and we walked out back after we're guzzling beers, and I'm interviewing them right next to the dumpster. And Chris Doherty, the lead guitarist and the singer, he's talking, and the 4 or 5 guys were out there, and they were just talking, and every other word out of their mouth was a curse. And I'm from New York, and you're from New York. We say the F word all the time anyway, naturally. But what I did was, I thought it was so funny. I put a little glossary in the cover story for Gangrene, and it said like asterisk, exclamation.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And it said fuck. And then I do another series of icons, and I wrote pussy. And I had like 4 words, and that was true because they spoke like that. But that was a funny story that I wrote. But
I just remembered though, when you mentioned Fathers too. The manager when I worked there was one of your old roommates,
Kevin Shea.
Hey, Kevin Shea.
He's long gone.
Oh, I know it. That's so sad. But boy, was he a wild
man. Well, I also did the Blues, James Montgomery, Alex Taylor from the Taylor family on Martha's Vineyard, and the Funk Busters. Who else? Axminster, Blockyard, New Man, Down Avenue. Who else? Body Politics, Roz and Cones, the Del Fuegos. A great story about the Del Fuegos. I had to do their cover story for the Beat. And Dave G goes, AJ, they're going to be playing here at a benefit for Abel Harris, who was murdered, the doorman who was murdered at Bunratty's. And so I get drunk. and they play, and I screwed out the bar, and Dave G was sure that I wasn't going to have the story in for the deadline. But what I did was I woke up the next morning and I called them at their hotel, and I interviewed them, and I walked into the Beat magazine, and they're all spitting at me, cursing at me, saying, "You left without the story." And I just handed them the story, and I said, "Here it is." And they were just, oof. All right, so now what we should do is we should talk about what we think happened to the Beat. All I know is after you fired me and we were on good terms, the magazine.
Well, we were still going out every night.
Right. It was, you and I were still going out because, but I think that the covers, non-local covers, a lot of the local businesses weren't advertising with Michael Bolton on the front cover. And that's what you said. There's a limit to how big the advertising was going to get in Boston. And I think that illustrates that. But I think that may have sparked people not advertising them. And the fact that, like,
I don't think it was, I'm not sure it was so much of an advertising issue or anything like that. I think actually after I left, I think for the next year, they were actually doing pretty well, because like I said, if you expand something, generally, even when it collapses, it's going to collapse higher than you were. So I remember running into, there was a girl that used to work for Don Law. I don't know if you remember her name. I can't.
Short hair, girl with short hair. She used to run Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Was that
I'll
it?
think of her name in some
Yeah. She was a nice lady, and I ran into her at the seminar down in New York that summer, and she was like, "Yeah, magazine's been doing real well. You did a great job with them." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not even with them anymore." And they go, "Well, you still did a great job with them." But they, first of all, certainly there was a lack of interest on Dave's part after, he left Bun Ratties. That, I think, to me was kind of like, his.
Well, you tell me today he just wants nothing to do with his rock and roll past. I run into him.
Not so much he doesn't want anything to do with it. He still has a lot of those friends, and he was helping, who was it, Bruce Marshall or whatever. He got him on a thing to play down at, whatchamacallit, Mohegan Sun or Foxwoods or whatever.
Right.
He still does that stuff. But, Dave was never really, he wasn't a musician. He wasn't, he wasn't there for that. He was, in his mind, a nightclub worker. And I think, and also, I think that he, he was kind of tired of that scene. I know it's surprising to hear, but
Yeah, because me and Mickey were the people that went out and did it every night.
Well, and he was in it a lot, as far as the night Bun Ratties was concerned, but also, his
which
wife
had nothing to do with the Beat.
His wife his wife to be or whatever, she wasn't into it, so it wasn't, it was kind of a way for
Well, another thing was the fact that me and Mickey weren't going out to clubs all over Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island as the people that were from the Beat magazine. Like I said, I used to go there saying, "I'm A.J. Wachtel from the Beat magazine." They say, "The Beat?" And I say, "Yeah, you don't see anybody from the Herald of the Globe coming to see you play on a rainy Wednesday night, do you?" Yeah. And they're still friends of mine because they still remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. You had the passion and all that stuff, to where it was about music and, and being around music and all that stuff. That was me and a lot of ways, and to Mickey Mickey wasn't just a nightclub guy. He could run any nightclub in the world, but he wasn't just a nightclub guy. He liked the music part of it. And even Michael, to that extent, but that was never really Dave. Dave was it was a job. He was a nightclub guy. He was a businessman. He was trying to make some money.
Right. Mickey O invented the Beat. Dave G had the money.
Yeah, that was it. Right. Yeah, that was really
basically that was it.
That was it at the time.
Yeah. But Dave G's a great guy, Mickey, and he's still around. I only see him once every 10 years, but
Well, Dave is my partner right now in the golf business. So
right, and what do you do?
He got me into it, and
yeah, why don't you tell what you do now, and if there's any ways that people can contact you, look you up, and if you're still in the music, let people know what you're doing.
Okay. All right. Well, basically, Dave and I are partners in a golf travel company. We're winding down our days on the planet, being old white guys and playing a lot of golf. And the company's called Golf and Gamble, and it gives golf trips. We provide golf trips to specifically gaming destinations in the Northeast, Arizona, Puerto Rico, places like that.
Listen, Gary, thank you so much for being on Wachtelligence. It was great to hear from you and talk to you. A lot of laughs, and keep yourself great. Keep rocking, buddy.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that there's still some old active brain cells up that I can remember some of this stuff.
You can count them on one finger.
That's pretty much it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Wachtelligence. You can connect with me on Facebook at Wachtelligence. Thanks to my producers, my son Harrison and David Schwartz, and Harvey Brooks for my theme song. Don't forget to subscribe.
I don't care what you think of me. Don't need no jailer to set me free. Don't want strangers filling up my cup. Don't need no advisor to show me down from up.